Hello, welcome back this week for this week's lesson tech help for Canvas teachers. Uh, this week we're going to continue the idea of inspiring students to complete their studies because sometimes they just don't log in and do their lessons. Now, one suggestion that I'm going to focus on this week is inspire teacher involvement to adapt the online curriculum. Now, the beautiful thing is that each of you have been called of God, and that you were called to direct your class, not just let the online writing do the teaching, but that you would be inspired and lead your class in inspired ways. And so things that you could consider when thinking about adapting a lesson and putting your teacher flavor in it and your inspiration would be these four things. Number one, what is the purpose of the overall lesson as well as the different parts of the lesson? And is there something that I feel like I need to adapt for my students? Two, what is the intent of the inspired author in the scriptures? And is the adaptation I'm considering in harmony with that adaptation? Great question to be asking as we're trying to teach from the scriptures. And three, what are my reasons for wanting to adapt the lesson? Is it simply a matter of personal preference, or will the change provide students with a better learning experience in the scriptures and by the Holy Ghost? And four, is my adaptation in harmony with the promptings of the Holy Ghost? So let's get to a few different ideas of meaningful adaptations that you could do. So you are very encouraged as online teachers to actually adapt the online seminary lessons to meet the needs of your students. And so some of those adaptations that you could make could be such as revising the lesson activity to be more relevant and interesting to your students. Maybe what is in that lesson won't just hit the same to your students as it would to others. And so feel free to go in and edit an activity and change the wording or some of the direction to make it more relevant to your students, just like you would if you were walking into a classroom. Second, deleting some content that may be too much or too difficult for your students to understand. Again, you are going to know your students best, and so you may need to do a little adjusting to help them have the best experience, and you might delete a few things. Third recommendation for meaningful adaptations is replacing content with the video recording of you or someone else testifying about a principle or doctrine in the scriptures or sharing a personal experience. This is really cool. It could be you, or you could grab someone in your family. You could grab a bishop. You could grab somebody else along the way and say, hey, could you just share a testimony about this? Again, just videotape them. You could do it on your phone or whatever, and then just transfer it right into that lesson, and that could be pretty cool. Fourth, you can substitute a quotation with one that was given more recently or that is easier for students to understand. Could be that there's some quotes in there from prophets and apostles or others that you just had an experience recently from General Conference or something that you're like, they just spoke on this and it would be better to share this. So go ahead and make those changes and make them come to life for your students. So the principle here is that sometimes some of your students might just need more involvement from a teacher in some simple, meaningful, purposeful ways to help them be more involved and get into the lessons more, because they realize, wow, I have a teacher that's walking and talking with me throughout this experience, and they're having an experience too and trying to guide my experience. That's pretty awesome. That's usually one of the greatest ways when we get feedback and we hear what helps students really get engaged. It's when they have a teacher staying very engaged along the way. So here's a few ideas that you could consider to think about being more engaged in your Canvas online lessons. Now, a few examples. I want to just let you do this. I'm going to share 2 pages of examples, and I just want you to pause the video when I'm on these and just read those and just think about, hey, what's the example that this is kind of coming? What's the principle behind it that might be able to help my students as I think about being involved in announcements or changing the class community discussions to meet the needs of my class and really get them engaged. So go ahead and pause the video, read these 2 examples, and think, what could I do in my class that might be helpful? And when it comes to announcements or class community discussions, what ideas come to mind? Now that you've talked about those two or thought about those two examples, look at the next two and think the same thing. Is there anything, as I think about my discussions and lessons and how I can locally create some things that might be able to liven up my class a little bit and involve my students? So take a moment, pause the screen, and read these two examples. All right. I hope as you look through those four examples that you had a few thoughts come to your mind. How could I be a little bit more involved so that my students could be a little bit more involved? That's really what it's all about. So this week, I just really encourage you to think, what is one thing that I might try this week that I could be a little bit more involved, that I think might have a meaningful impact on the involvement of my students? And try it out. Stick with it for a little while and see what happens. Have an awesome week and know that you're loved.